Hello, team. We are back in the Fireside PM podcast. And today I have a very special guest. I've got Joe, is it Torregano?
It is indeed. It is.
Torregano from the great city of London, who did an interesting LinkedIn post that caught my eye, which was sort of providing a counterpoint or an alternate perspective to some of the stuff that I think we've all read. Marty Cagan's multiple books, and I thought it was like, oh, that's pretty interesting because I kind of agree in some ways with what you were saying. But before we get into the post, why don't we just get a little bit of introduction to yourself, Joe?
Sure. Thanks, Tom. And great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And apologies if I end up saying anything controversial. It wasn't the intent, but we'll see how we go. So I'm a product guy. I've been doing product for 25 some years. Co-founded a couple of startups, been in some big blue chips like eBay and GlaxoSmithKline and so on. And done a load of other things along the way, including some actual sales jobs, some actual technology jobs, and obviously a lot of product management stuff. So eclectic experiences to bring to bear.
Yeah. So it sounds like you've been in the trenches and you've seen it done and you've done it. And of course, you've been keeping track of the trends and the theory as well. What was the kind of spirit of the post you wrote?
Yeah, well, really, I think I was. I guess I would start by saying I think Marty Cagan's written some great books. He's done a lot to educate us all in what best practice looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a good thing. So I'd start with that. I think there's been quite a lot of talk and chatter about those books, and some of his podcasts in places perhaps haven't sounded as empathetic towards product management as they could have done. So I think what I was trying to do was really just give a perspective from someone who has faced some different realities or has not operated quite in the kind of, I wouldn't call it a Silicon Valley bubble that he's describing, but it is preaching a certain amount of product perfection that I haven't really seen anywhere in my lifetime. So I kind of wanted to give people a sense of, okay, read the best practice, love those books, internalize them, learn from them, distill them, but then never mention them ever again to anybody who's not in product. Because that seems to be where it's going wrong. And that was kind of the message I kind of wanted to get to people is take from it what you can, but then embrace your world and your realities.
There was a comment in your post by someone else who had responded to your post, and he was saying, he used the term, I hadn't heard it before, but I kind of knew right away what it meant. I think it was something like prod UX explaining.
Yeah. Product explaining, yeah. It was a brilliant comment from Fabrizio de Mazari. I won't claim it, and that individual won't claim it, but yeah, there's a lot of that. I think there's a lot of us running around telling the business how it's meant to be,
mm-hmm.
and how they should be acting, and mm-hmm. I don't think that is the path to success. I think, I guess you say you know exactly what that means and why it's going to fall on deaf ears and get you into trouble. So I guess I was trying to encourage people to not do that kind of thing.
Yeah, it reminds me of there used to be discussion of PMs as mini CEOs, and then that I think the industry realized like that wasn't like the best way to describe it for people who aren't PMs. And maybe there is a bit of a God complex that we still have to deal with in the PM function that, for better or for worse, many organizations do look to product management as like really helping make the hardest calls and driving things and making stuff happen. And, I think we do have a very high bar for, what we expect from PMs. That doesn't mean that you are like the Messiah either. And it sounds like one of the things I that resonated with me was your your description of you've got to be good at change management as well.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely, and I totally hear you on the Messiah point. I think maybe one of the downsides to being a product person is that if you are very data led, you're very evidence based. You've been in the trenches, you've talked to real customers, you kind of have a sense of what truth is, right? And so you're out there screaming, I have the right answer. I know this to be true, and that's the downside, because actually it leaves you getting a little bit egomaniacal on occasion. Because the point I suppose I'm trying to make is you have to meet the organization where it's at, right? You have to engage in change management. So all the traditional techniques of creating champions and doing little exemplars and small wins that show the value of the way you're trying to work, but without going gung-ho and without trying to just get in there and transform an organization that may not have given you that mandate, and may not be seeking to change at the pace that would give you personal or professional fulfillment. You have to meet them where they are. It's like when in Rome, be a Roman first. So speak their language, understand how they want to do things, figure out where you can get those wins, but don't be too aggressive about it. And again, going back to some of Marty's podcasts, I think there's a certain sense that everyone should be able to affect change. Not everybody has the same level of agency. Not everybody has the same level of energy or capability or desire to do those things. And I think what we as product folk need to be, particularly product leaders, actually, is that if we're looking to work in a product way in an organization that's not used to it, then slowly and incrementally help them understand what that means and do it in their language and work within their context. That would kind of be my guidance on that thing.
I'm reminded of my experience working at a bunch of luckily pretty strong product organizations that had, like, the company had a culture of valuing product management. And there was like an interesting thing where everybody valued product, everybody wanted to be customer centric, and it's a company, it's a business that is there to, yes, build great products, but also to drive shareholder value and deliver meaningful growth quarter after quarter. And sometimes that means you have to, I don't want to be disparaging to the people who are heavy on theory, but sometimes I do think we kind of wander off into the ivory tower a little bit, and you gotta dig some trenches, and that's just the way it is. And it's always challenging, especially I think with earlier career PMs, because they are so positively influenced by great product theory out there. But you've got to realize, like, okay, yes, that is the aspirational goal, and then there's all these trade-offs: organizational, business, technical debt, PR, regulatory, financial results, giant whale customer requests. And you can't just say, like, oh no, I'm gonna be all about the user, because that's like necessary but not sufficient.
Yeah, and I think we sometimes get carried away with the notion of just delighting users. I think we all want to please the customer. We want to understand them and then deliver something that creates value for them. But too often we can get forgetful of our purpose is actually to build a sustainable, profitable, valuable business. Those two things have to go hand in hand. And I think we have spent quite a lot of time, or the industry or people have spent quite a lot of time talking about those great customer experiences and those great ways to delight consumers, but not necessarily reminding everyone that the guardrail is, are you making any money? So the viability point of the feasibility, desirability, viability kind of holy trinity is sometimes gets missed. And I think that's really, particularly in the C-suite, that's really what matters. If you're building a delightful business for customers, brilliant. But if you're not making any money, you will go bust and you don't deserve to exist. So let's bring it back to some fundamentals, right? Now, some businesses have been lucky enough to spend a very long time focusing on delight, knowing that it should bring profitability afterwards. So Zappos and Amazon are my sort of favorite examples of this, because they initially didn't have to focus quite so hard on the day-to-day profitability. And I do believe that if you make customers happy, then good things should happen for the business. In general, the customer will send you in the right path. But you've got to come at it with a commercial lens that says, where's the money in this? How am I making the business successful? And if that means satisfying a whale customer or doing something else, then so be it. And you have to be pragmatic. I think in my post, what I was trying to do was really say three things, particular to the sort of more sort of junior PM, I guess, which is, the first is, it was about reality, and then the second was about respect, and then I think the third really is pragmatism. So, because on the reality front, as you say, Tom, there are plenty of businesses that just don't have the operating model that you're talking about. I, for instance, find myself in places where product management is not respected. It's not kind of in the DNA, and therefore you have to create that respect. So in that world, you will have HiPPOs, you will have a lack of data, you will have bad behaviors, you will have projects rather than products, and so on. And these are good things. That's normal. Embrace that normality, right? That is the world that most of us exist in, rather than the world of inspired or empowered or transformed, right? Great books, but they preach product imperfection. They're not kind of the world that we live in. So reality matters. But then the second bit for me that I was really trying to drive home was that respect point. Because what I find with some individuals, or there's a bit of a tendency to go, right, well, I've read the book, I know how it's meant to be. Therefore, because the business is not doing that, I will reject them and I will be disrespectful of all the success they've had to date. It's a bit like the HiPPO phenomena. You should love your HiPPO, because the highest paid person typically has done good things and is the highest paid person with an opinion for good reason, right? So listen to them, embrace them, and be respectful of all that they bring to the table. Now, maybe the business needs to change. It may be that product is there because actually they're being disrupted or anything else, but you have to respect what's gone beforehand and then meet the business in that place. And that's the point. The final point for me is pragmatism, is meet the business where it's at, achieve what you can within your constraints and within your gift and your agency. Too much thinking about how it's meant to be rather than how it is will get you into trouble.
Yeah, I think maybe there's an approach where we as PMs should be more really outcomes driven than product or customer driven. You'll need to understand the customer and delight them in order to produce the positive outcomes. But if you frame it as like, hey, we're here to generate positive outcomes for the company, then it captures like, oh, well, then I've got to come up with a compelling, sustainable business model. I have to have a right pricing strategy. I have to, of course, have the right product strategy and great customer experience. But I also have to figure out how this organization can get behind this, or can it, and is it ready to? And maybe then that really captures the mini CEO lens more than, oh, I'm in charge, like I'm going to do a bunch of sprints and you're going to build this and people are going to love it. Like that approach, I don't think it does well, because I think, to your point in your post, if you preach about being customer driven and data driven, whoever's on the other side of that the fence that's hearing this is going to interpret it as saying like, oh, so you're saying I don't understand customers? You're saying that I'm not able to do math? Like that's not a winning approach to changing opinions.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. You don't win any hearts and minds with that kind of comment, as you say. It's particularly tricky, if you're talking to founders or the CEO, because they came from understanding the customer problem and the customer initially, and they get that. So to suggest that they're not close to their customer is disrespectful. May well be accurate, but it's certainly disrespectful and forgets the kind of history. And I think that's where we need to flex our skills in terms of gently introducing more evidence or finding ways to de-risk following their suggestion. If we have to do what the HiPPO says, then great, do it. But just find a way to de-risk it, both for your career, but also for the business decision. And just help the organization understand what you're trying to do without standing up and going no or why. And there's an awful lot of stuff on LinkedIn and so on that says, you know, the product people need to learn how to say no and need to learn how to say why. Both of those two things are true. But what we also need to learn to do is to say it in such a sensitive and polite and diplomatic way that the other person just loves to answer the question or loves to change their mind. And I think you dig your heels in, you start saying, well, where's your evidence? Or why have you not spoken to a customer? Or trust me, I've spoken to more customers than you have. Or here's my spreadsheet. You know, you're just not going to win any battles.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you could do those same activities, but how you frame it with the decision maker matters so much. Like in your example, if rather than saying like, oh, well, here's my spreadsheet, you should do this. If someone said to me, hey, I've been doing some analysis and I noticed some interesting trends here. And I wanted to get your opinion on whether you think this is an opportunity as well. Like right away, I'm invited in to the conversation and I don't feel like I have to defend, myself or whatever. Or if they said, hey, I recently conducted a few user interviews and I heard something that I thought was kind of interesting. I was wondering, has this come up on your radar as well? Here's some examples. Because one of the things that I've noticed is the kind of PM to HiPPO, highest for those who are listening, a highest paid person in the organization, for like the key decision maker. The PM to HiPPO relationship can sometimes really take on an unconstructive dynamic where the PM assumes that, oh my God, this HiPPO is so clueless. Like, why are they advocating this strategy that clearly doesn't make any sense? We should obviously do option C instead. And unfortunately, many PMs don't often ask the HiPPO, hey, I'm kind of curious. Like, what's the thinking behind option A? Because to me, it seems like there's like a lot of trade-offs there, and C seems more attractive. 8 times out of 10, the HiPPO is going to say, well, that's a great question, Joe. Let me tell you a little bit of history about how we landed with A. And we actually wanted to do C. But because of these things that are not obvious, we couldn't make that call. But let's talk about, is there a way that we can kind of, eventually iterate our way towards C or whatever. So that there can be this dynamic of like, oh, the corner office, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. And that's it's just not super helpful for anybody.
Yeah, I think that's my point on respect. In a nutshell, there, just respect the people in the business, respect what's gone on before. There's probably good reasons for what's being said or what people have achieved. They may well be wrong, but there's a right way and a wrong way to step into it. And always start the sentence with yes and, not no because. Build, don't rebut. It's better to kind of take the HiPPO's opinion and then try and understand them and work with them on what it is that they've said. Because as you say, there may well be some history. Now, it may be that the history is no longer relevant, in which case, great, times have changed and therefore you can maybe advance their thinking and advance your thinking. But it might be that they're absolutely right and you just don't understand all the things that they're talking about. But it has to start with mutual respect. And I guess what I've seen in some contexts has been a certain amount of disrespect, a certain amount of individuals going, well, I've read the book, I know how it's meant to be. Why are you people doing it in this different way that doesn't follow best practice?
Yeah, totally. I wonder if the size and kind of maturity of the company also has an impact on how kind of frameworks first you can be. Because if it's like a super early stage startup that is pre-market fit and they're trying to find their way, then I would take the position that, oh yeah, as a PM, like you should absolutely be super, super maniacal about the customers and iterate fast and try lots of things. Like that's exactly what you should do. That is not the approach you would advocate for a company that's, maybe already making 100 million a year and they have an existing business with an existing set of customers and a established roadmap. So do you think like the maturity of the company is a good kind of axis to think about how a PM should calibrate their style, or do you think there are different factors and that we should think about?
No, I think it's an excellent suggestion, and I think perhaps a nuance to it is that in those very large established companies, it may well be that the thing that you're talking about is closer to the startup. And what I mean by that is, I was in the UK's largest parcel delivery business, so it knows how to deliver parcels for large UK retailers. It's brilliant. It has tripled in size in 5 years. Amazing business. But it sought to do more work in the B2C space and to go after the SME community, so much smaller companies as opposed to the big retailers. So in an organization like that, you have a huge amount of domain expertise and capability in one area, but the other area is effectively a startup. So all the things you'd want to be doing in terms of experimentation and discovery and testing your way into something have to apply in that space, because actually, despite how successful you are as a business, that bit is much fresher, much newer, and people's opinions should be calibrated accordingly.
Yeah.
I.e., you can just discount quite a lot of them.
Yeah.
But you definitely need to step into it in a much more gentle way, because you have people who are successful in a domain and have a certain way of understanding the world, and that's a world that has been successful for them. And therefore, you have to be respectful of that and make sure that you approach them in a style that is welcoming and inviting, and is respectful of what it is that they've achieved, rather than confrontational and suggesting that actually they need to start from scratch with their thinking, because that's not where they're coming from. So you have to meet them where they're at.
That reminds me of a PM coaching client I was working with last year, and they were the first call I had with them. They were like, "Hey, I've got this really hard problem. I'm the most senior PM that was brought into this company. I report to the founder, and that founder, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Like he doesn't come from product, he doesn't even come from engineering, he's some sales guy, yada yada, and he's not responding well to my decisions." And I I still remember I had to say to the client, I was like, okay, I get it, you are super smart, you've done PM at very famous companies, you have a great, university education, all fantastic. You did not start that company. That founder started that company, and they have built it into a very large business. Whether or not you're right or wrong, like being right is necessary but not sufficient. Like you have to find a way to work with this founder, and it shouldn't feel like you're educating him entirely, because you probably have something to learn from him about how the business works, how the customers work, or the current products or whatever. But that is so often the case where, if you come in and to your point of meeting people where they are, if they're not looking for a radical overnight transformation, then you can't force that on them. Like that's something that like the company has to be ready for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're so right on that one. And I think we sometimes forget that being right is not what's important. It's about being effective. If you've got a trade-off between those two, be effective, right? Deliver an outcome for the business rather than feeling good about the fact that you're technically or intellectually correct. because actually that's not what moves things forward. And I think it's hard to embrace the fact that sometimes you have to do things in a suboptimal way or in a slower pace than you might like, or you have to sacrifice a few things at the margin or do some things you're uncomfortable with. But the job is to be effective and to create the outcomes. And you won't do that if your sole focus is being right.
Joe, we only have a few minutes left, but I thought we could wrap up with maybe an example from your experience in product where you kind of had to calibrate and meet the organization where it was, and that required you to not do exactly what the book said, but you had to kind of to tune it for the environment.
Yeah, and yeah, happy to. I mean, I spend quite a lot of my time in non-product organizations, so it's a perennial thing I'm dealing with. Again, maybe going back to that parcel delivery organization, you know, they had initially sort of drunk the Kool-Aid. I'm not quite sure how this came to be, but they thought product was a great thing, and they brought in some agencies to help them with that transformation. And so an awful lot of people were suddenly running around trying to do things in a product-based way, though without necessarily the clarity of what that is. But what became quite obvious to me when I joined was that some things are not products. They are, in fact, projects. And therefore, there is no need to do large amounts of discovery or large amounts of work if, in fact, you have a short-term, finite thing to get done. And it's about recognizing that just because you have a hammer, not everything is a nail, right? You know, you need to apply the right kind of team to the right kind of customer problem. The more you are doing something where there is greater risk of failure or greater risk of getting the investment wrong, the more you need to do discovery and the more you need to gather information. And I'm a big fan of Colin Powell's dictum around, you know, get 40% of the information that you need to make a decision, but not more than 70%. And so get all of that stuff sorted if you're in an area where there is risk. But for some other things, they are just simple projects. And so therefore, we had to try and undo some of the work in that organization, make them appreciate that it was okay to have some things done in a very project way and other things done in a very product way with an enduring team and an enduring life cycle. And trying to keep those two things going in the same organization is and was challenging, simply because, you know, you read a book and it says we have to move to product-centric ways of working. It's like, no, you don't. You need to do product work where product adds value. But if all you're doing is punching out a particular re-platform or actually in their case, opening warehouses, for instance, those are projects, not products. And you always have to pick the right tool for the task.
Yeah. It's a common human trend of you get a new hammer, everything looks like a nail, and not everything is a Gen AI problem to solve, everybody. Just so you know. Some are, but not everything. Well, Joe, it's been terrific having you on the show. Any final thoughts or suggestions on how people can kind of stay in touch with you?
No, I'm happy to carry on the conversation, and you know, I think we learn from each other, we learn from our different experiences, and we've all got distinct perspectives. So no, please get in touch by all means. I'm on LinkedIn. I think you have my my URL up on the screen. So yeah, be delighted to connect and talk through some stuff. If I can help in any way, obviously happy to do that. Though I would say that, you know, this is just my world and my context, right? Each one's different. You know, none of us really is a guru, despite the fact that some of us have written books.
Thank you so much, Joe. And I agree. It's a diverse profession with people operating in a whole different variety of environments. And there isn't one way to do it. But the more we can understand everybody's perspectives, we can kind of develop our own path. So appreciate you sharing your perspective, and hope that we can have you back on the show again in the future.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Tom.
Take care, Joe. Bye.
Cheers then. Bye-bye.
All right. That was Joe Tarragano talking about the kind of puritanical risk of being too much of a theorist on product management. And then on the other side, to be fair, there's probably a lot of people who are just too incrementalist, and they just want to, they don't want to rock the boat. And I guess your job as PM's team is to figure out when you want to rock that boat and when you want to just row. And over the course of your career, you're going to have to switch back and forth, and probably even over the course of a job. There are some things that you should just row. And there are some things where you're like, wait, time out. Like, we have got to make a 90-degree change, and here's why. But be judicious about when you do that. Last thing I'll share is I've got a class on Maven that is starting in a couple of weeks about doing product reviews. So if you work at a company where they do a lot of product reviews, or they're starting to do more, and this is where usually the executive leadership, a couple levels above you, wants to do a meeting about the status of your project, or weigh in on an important decision, or get an update on a specific concern that they have. This is going to be all about how to set yourself up for the most successful review you can. It'll be really experiential, interactive, pretty small class. I think I've limited it to 10 students. So check it out on maven.com/TomL. And then I'm also going to be doing another class in, I think, May. Yeah, May, which I'm also looking forward to, which is business strategy for non-MBA PMs. So if you're a PM with a CS undergrad, you've done well, you've kind of reached a senior IC role, and you're like, hey, I'd like to have more of a voice around business decisions or big bets. And I find that the absence of an MBA, makes me wonder if I'm kind of missing some frameworks or thinking about problems a certain way. That might be the class for you. That one is also on Maven. Just search for Leung, my last name. And hopefully this conversation was useful to you. And if you want one-on-one coaching, you can look me up, tomleungcoaching.com. All right, team, get back to work. I'll see you guys later.